ended up getting a call from the choir just as I was walking out the door that I had to take. So, or what, that would have been up here about 15 minutes ago. Well, I had to cut the conversation off after I got, taking care of the crucial business on that call.
I saw Mary Helen at Harris Teeter like 3 days ago, 4 days ago.
You get a copy of the agenda? Good.
You need to go as many times as you need to.
The outing is 1 hour a week at here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
When she's home now, she's on the phone
Yeah,
because it's open enrollment time.
I gotta go look at that site when I'm done here.
Town of Southern Shores Council Work Session for October 20th, 2020 is now in order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
If you would, please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you. Council, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
We had simultaneous approval. Motion.
I'll
Do I have
second.
a second? Thank you,
We
Elizabeth.
didn't practice that.
The motion and a second. All in favor of approving the agenda indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We have an agenda. Before I open public comment, today's work session is an opportunity for us to hear from our manager concerning a number of items oriented primarily around budget issues and to express our thoughts and understanding of these issues. A chance for us to kind of brainstorm a little bit. We may or may not decide to take any action relative to today's discussions. We're not required to. This time I'll open the general public comment. Thank you, David. Just check and see if anybody signed up. No? Okay, thank you. I'll close public comment this time. And I'll now call on our town manager. Cliff, good morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. There's a lot of information in front of you. In your packet, there's quite a lot of information. But what I'd like to do is kind of break this out into two parts and present to you first a capital improvement plan that is also broken into two parts. One would be that we discuss the excess revenue or the revenue we realized that we weren't anticipating because of a loss from coronavirus. That would be the first part of that. The second part of that would be to get your input on the framework for a capital improvement plan. As the mayor said, none of what we're asking for today requires you to make any decisions or to take any action. We're just simply seeking guidance and direction on moving forward, and hopefully a consensus can be reached concerning some of the items that we could bring back on a future agenda. Part two of this is whether or not you wanted to get into a more detailed strategic plan or a long-range plan, a comp plan, or a combination of all of that. I think the question is, does the council feel as though we need a more formal process to lay out the path you would like us to take to achieve your goals and objectives? In your packet, I've got information on strategic plans and comprehensive plans, but I wanted to just kind of try to briefly capture the three concepts I'm putting in front of you today. First, the capital improvement plan. It's a plan that contains all the individual capital projects, equipment purchases, and major studies for our town. The CIP represents a balance between maintaining the town's existing assets and investing in new assets to support the town's growth, as well as ensuring that investments are made in accordance with the priorities that you set. That's the capital improvement plan. The strategic plan is defined as a deliberative, disciplined effort to produce fundamental decisions and actions that shape and guide what Southern Shores is, what we do, and why we do it. This process usually focuses on addressing key strategic questions. You go through the process, you would ask, where are we? Why do we exist? What are our values? Where do we want to go? How do we get there? And how do we know that we're making progress? And then finally, the comp plan. The one distinction I think can be made between a strategic plan and a comp plan is a comp plan is more geared towards land use development, subdivision ordinances, all things that kind of dictate what the code of ordinances does for development. The comp plan would pretty much be housed in the planning department. That would be kind of their guiding tool that they would use moving forward. The strategic plan would be more of a administrative plan that we would implement with all staff, but obviously with town council's direction. But a comprehensive plan establishes a framework to guide public and private decisions about future growth, preservation, and change within our town over the next maybe 20 years or longer. It is focused mainly on physical development. The comprehensive plan communicates the community's goals and objectives, provides a blueprint for future land use, and serves as the basis for zoning, subdivision, and land use codes. The comp plan probably doesn't get updated nearly as much as a strategic plan. I think a strategic plan is something that you would refer to at least yearly. But the main thing I wanted to try and accomplish today is to go through the budget, make some decisions on where you want to go from here with some of this excess revenue. Do we want to do the projects that were budgeted but then removed again because of the pandemic? And then also to really look at the capital improvement plan to see if that is on the right path. This is a draft of the capital improvement plan. This is the first time you've seen it to discuss it, so obviously there could potentially be some changes, will be some changes, I'm sure. But then after that, I think maybe you want to go deeper into a strategic plan, but I think that may be the second half of today's discussion, if you agree. So if it's all right, then we'll go right to the capital improvement plan. One thing I do want to give you, I've added, again, this is a growing or a ever evolving document, but I've updated it, and I'll explain what I've done.
Thank you.
What I've done is just updated. I put a new column in, and what I've added is in red. So you'll see in red it says potential funding source. I think it would be helpful if when we're looking at these items and we're financing and we're projecting years out, that we know whether or not it's coming from the general fund. If it could come from grant, you can make a decision. We're not going to do this unless we get the grant. based on what your priorities are. We know the beach nourishment fund is going to come from that. The money is going to come from that fund. And another aspect of this is contributing more to our capital reserve fund than we currently are. And capital reserve fund and putting money in that for future projects allows you to kind of budget years and years out in advance. You could put money in a capital reserve fund this year for streets that you may want to build up that fund so that you have the money to do some major street improvements. The others are just, the other things I've added are just maybe some updated numbers. Nothing dramatic. I did add under planning the need to address our file storage room. It's at capacity. And then also I've started putting footnotes for some of these items. For example, the fire department debt service. I think it's important that we have here, right on this page, you can see how long that financing is for, what the interest is, the payments. Then the CIP for the fire department. It's important to note that that's not funded separate and apart as a part of the CIP. That's part of their appropriation. But I do think it's important to have it on this document. And then also added under streets, there's a typo there, but the street, the projects that are in the streets CIP are based off of the CIP recommendation that the council approved on July 9th of 2019. So that date's wrong. But first, what we're looking at is, if you look on this, at the top of this first sheet, you'll see the revenue sources that we have right now. We have, after the audit we just received and was reported to you, we have $4,245,546 in available fund balance. That's fund balance that we can use that is that still leaves your policy right now with $1,750,000. We add to that, there's $100,000 in this year's budget that's not been, it's a budgeted amount for street improvements, capital projects that has not been appropriated or designated. That's after the Dewberry project. And then what we're recommending today is, or asking for you to consider, is expenditures of $2,248,602. And so that would still leave $2 million in fund balance above and beyond your $1,750,000. So what makes up that 2 million is 2.2 is a lot of money, but the majority of that is in streets. And at the top, you'll see the expenditures. We had building upgrades. The first three, the building upgrades, Oats, trail paving, and Hillcrest Drive, were all projects that were previously budgeted, but were taken out. So that's the basis for recommending they come back now, with the assumption that if we hadn't been affected by the pandemic, these things would have been done. The building upgrades of $190,000, the Oats Trail paving project of $484,000, and then Hillcrest Drive from Hickory to the Civic Association tennis courts, $937,000. That makes up 1.6 million of the 2.2, and then the rest are things that I'm asking you to consider now that you haven't considered before. So these would be newer items, minus the police officer. But I've got a proposal from our website developer to make improvements, upgrades, modernization to our website, $5,800. We know that the radios are nearing their effect or their date of being obsolete. We're already getting to where we can't maintain, or some of these radios aren't supported. The plan we have in front of you would lay out $51,000 a year for the next 3 years, with the current fiscal year and the next 2, to bank money to pay for those radios. There's a recommendation that you fund one police officer position, and that probably should have been at the top, because I don't know that you ever budgeted for the police officer and then took it out, but it was something that you had considered, and I believe, again, had it not been for the pandemic, that additional officer would have been funded. I'm recommending that you look at the capital reserve fund and utilize that more for project development or project financing than we have before. Bonnie and I met yesterday with one of the, probably the likely, or the lender for all of the beach nourishment projects in Dare County to date. And they too advised that it's beneficial, it's helpful, it's a good idea for us to go ahead and put money in a capital reserve fund that's designated for beach nourishment. We're recommending that at $250,000. And then I think you've had a fund balance policy that I think you should increase it eventually to $3 million. And the policy, I believe, says 1.75, but it has been, 3 million has been discussed by some of you, or at least I've had those conversations. But 3 million would put us at nearly 50% of our general fund budget. I think that's a good place to be. Now that decision would be whether or not you jump straight to 3 million now, or you budget $250,000 over a 5-year period to get you to $3 million. One consideration, there's a lot of things that I think need to be addressed, and so jumping straight to the 3 million might hamstring you from being able to do more street projects or do some other capital investments. So that's kind of, I'll leave it there for your discussion about where we are now and the use of any of the additional revenue that we're looking at. And then after that, I'd like to get your input on the rest of the capital improvement plan.
Council, any thoughts?
The maintaining the 3 million. I don't think we've got the capability to do it tomorrow without impacting something else. I would think maybe we could do that over a 3 or 4 year period. That's my thoughts.
We would be at what, 3.7, even $3,000?
That's right. Yeah, that.
And then we've also got contributions annually, so I mean, we would be contributing in excess of that $2 million if you follow this expenditure outlay right now.
Right, unless you were to use additional revenue.
Yeah.
If you were to appropriate from the general fund budget.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
So on the reserve fund, just for clarity, it's an amount of money that a local government wants to essentially have in reserve in case of a calamity.
Correct.
Where revenues would not be coming in for some amount of time. You could still keep the town running.
Correct.
And your thought process on the 3 million was at current rates, we could go for
6 months.
6 months. Okay. Now, if we put the money in that reserve fund, are there any restrictions on how that money can be dispersed?
If it's in undesignated fund balance, no ma'am. But if you were to put it in a capital reserve fund, there would be.
And what are those restrictions specifically?
The capital reserve fund, you already have one, and by resolution, you've designated what the funds could be used for. It could be used for mainly capital infrastructure. It could be used for beach nourishment. It could be used for streets. It could be used for canals. There are other things that it could be used for. But once you put that money in that capital reserve fund and you designate it, you could have one fund with multiple line items. You could have a capital reserve fund that has money appropriated for beach nourishment, streets, canals, and you do have for canals. There's money that could only be spent on canals. So that would be the process for the capital reserve fund.
Yeah, I guess I'm sorry. I'm asking about the,
Can I,
Fund
Cliff, I think that, let me clarify something. So we have a capital reserve fund, which is what Cliff is speaking of.
Mhm.
And what we're talking about is the unassigned fund balance within the general fund. Two different things. So make sure that you all understand that. The unassigned fund balance is what Cliff is talking about, increasing from 1.75 to 3 million. So that unassigned fund balance can be spent any way that the council so chooses. In the capital reserve fund, the only thing that we have right now designated for something specific is for the canal, channel, and maintenance. And that amount is the 118,000 of the 207,393 that's in there. So the difference in that, the 89,393 can be spent anyway. But the unassigned fund balance, I think what she wanted to know, Cliff, is if we increase it from 1.75 to 3 million, if we have to dip into that and go under our policy, I think that's what your question was,
Yeah, I
right?
just want to know if we get it up to 3, is there anything that prevents us from using it if we have to use it for
Your
something else?
policy. I mean,
Just policy.
Right.
Okay,
By statute, that there is nothing that would keep you from using it,
gotcha.
but your policy would say you wouldn't.
Let it go
unless-
under that. Understood. And then my only other question was about on the capital side, if we have things designated for canals, we have things designated for streets, bulkheads, whatever. If we want to, at some future date, can we reallocate
Yes.
that to a different capital project? It has to be capital, but can we change the project?
Yeah, the same method that appropriates the money via ordinance would be the same way you would reappropriate.
Okay,
The ordinance that giveth can take it away.
understood. Thank you.
Well, if, let me use the canals capital reserve fund as an example. We've got 118,000 is,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
okay. If, for example, we want to spend that on canals, do we need to approve that up here or?
Yes. You would need to authorize
The
any-
expenditure of it? Okay, I get it that we can't just eliminate it without.
Right. Yeah, the money in that capital reserve, we would have to get council authorization to expend those funds.
Okay,
And staff couldn't move that money without your authorization. It's you all have the purse strings tight for that.
okay, so the capital reserve fund has got a boatload of legal restrictions.
And I think a good way to look at it is again, you've set your priorities long-term. You've
Right.
recognized that canals one day is going to be a major expenditure. And rather than paying as you go, rather than you've acknowledged that today, hopefully it's 20 years from now, but in 20 years, you're going to have an expense.
Right,
And if you were to put $100,000 just away each year towards that expense, then you would have the money to pay for it versus, needing to borrow money or use up the rest of fund balance. It's just, I think that's the intent.
Let's start with the fund balance. I mean, they're proposing changing our policy to 3 million. Let's have that discussion and develop recommendations for that policy.
Yeah, that was the next thing I was going to say is I agree with Leo. I like the idea of doing the stepwise a contribution to build it up to where we want to be at 3 million. And
But-
5 years seems reasonable to me.
Well, if it's already there, even with this, that's why I said, let's set 3 million, because even if we follow this expenditure, it's already there. It's in excess of 3 million, and then we're contributing 250 a year to it. Maybe that could be contributed to capital reserve fund. So let's establish what our policy for the unassigned fund balance should be. I would kick out there that, keep the 1.75 for day-to-day operation support, put $1 million in there for hurricane relief, and $250,000 as a buffer budget, and that's, take it off of that.
You understand that?
Yeah, he's saying doing it all at once versus doing it step at a time, correct?
We discussed
No.
this.
No.
We already have it. We're not drawing it down. So when they're showing you $4.2 million, that's reduced by $1.7 million. So if we deduct $2.2 million, we still have $2 million left plus the $1.7 million, correct? So we
Yes,
would,
that's
even,
correct.
even if we adopted all these expenditures that's been recommended to us today, which I'm not necessarily advocating for, and I'm not, but we would have 3.7 in our unassigned fund balance, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
So we don't need to continue to add to it. We're still in excess by $700,000.
You're just on paper, you're saying it's going to grow at that rate. I mean, it's going to be there anyway.
But if our target is to maintain a $3 million unassigned fund balance, anything in excess of that should be spent. I mean, it should be used for capital improvement. So if we're carrying 3.7 and our policy is 3, that's $700,000 we need to allocate over, maybe, we look at some of our improvements that we're looking at 5 years down the road, and we can say, okay, well, this will help us borrow better, or we can put more of a down payment down. I mean, and then that gets shifted over to capital. I mean, I don't think, we're not talking about building to it because we're already there, right?
And Matt, I will say too, if you all agree on the $3 million for the target, then anything over that is what we would have available, say, if we had a hurricane to get us through, that sort of thing. So if it was the 3.7, we would have 700,000, which we're almost at the end of hurricane season, thankfully. But that would be the money that we would use to float us until we get FEMA money, which is usually 12 to 18 months.
What if the unassigned fund balance included in the policy the hurricane relief money? I mean, then
You
it
could
would be
do that.
encompassed in that.
Yeah,
That's
you-
my view when we would
Yeah,
do
you
something
could
like
do
that
that.
for $3 million. Because
You could do that.
We laid out, we had to have 560 in cash on hand last year. I mean, the $1 million with a 250 buffer and then the additional 1.7 operating costs. I mean, that's in business world, they try to suggest 6 months liquidity. Town governments never will have 6 months of no revenue. I mean, that just is structurally will not happen in a government. I mean, their county would have to fail precipitously.
Well,
We'd be in a lot bigger boat than 6 months of liquidity if that were the case, is my point. So, I mean, it's $3 million, and I would like to incur a hurricane relief statement within that policy.
Yes.
Yeah, that 3 million would all encompass.
Okay.
I think what I'm hearing you saying, and what I've been thinking, Cliff, is it possible to have a capital reserve fund specific to hurricane?
No, sir.
Okay, all right.
It's just our unassigned fund balance. I'm going to nickname it our strategic reserve fund. It's the unassigned fund balance. It's the non-committed funds in our budget in excess. It's your savings account.
which we can use for whatever we need to spend it on.
The
Because if
state
we go to the
requires-
capital, we're restricted.
What's the statutory? Is there a statutory?
I don't think it's
So theoretically, we could be carrying zero. Of course, the LGA would yell at us and say,
Yeah,
"You're running
LGC.
They
terribly
say-
insolvent," but
they recommend 8%, but that's across the state. Of course, we had this conversation yesterday. I'm not sure what portion of the state is immune from emergency,
yeah.
but 8% is what is recommended. You go below that, of course, in the coastal area, that's not realistic.
We're looking at like 45%. So, I mean, I think
So basically what you're saying is you want to just put some policy wording into the unassigned fund balance that it has the word hurricane in it. Hurricane relief, hurricane
I would like
strategic.
that personally, and I might be overdoing it, I'd like to specify the numbers. It's like 1.75 for day-to-day operations support, $1 million for hurricane relief, so $250,000. I mean, it's a policy. It's not statutorily restricting those funds. It's just communicating why we're reaching that savings target and what our goals are for that savings target.
And it's just numbers on paper because
Yeah, I was
it's
gonna
just
say,
recognition that one day there will be or could be a catastrophic storm and we need to have the money to pay for it.
Yeah, and I think it also sends a message to the citizens, the taxpayers, that you can anything. You're not considering any use of funds above $3 million, and that's pretty conservative. So hopefully that gives some confidence that what decisions you make as far as funding money to spend, you still have 6 months of operating that you've by policy said we're not going to touch that. We're going to set that aside, and that's I mean, 3 million, 50% is pretty strong.
Okay by me. do we need a motion or are we just talking today?
No, well, we could, or we could bring back in the November meeting, a list of all of this that you
Yeah,
could.
I'd like to see what,
I would, yeah, if there's consensus, or just say, if you want to redraft that policy, so there's something that we can post and describe the purposes of reaching the $3 million agreed to for Clifton Pursuit.
And
Alright.
is it based on is it 3 million today? Or is it 250, is it a plan to get there, or do we get there now?
I feel like we're already well in excess of it. Sort of silo capital today.
What's the downside of going ahead and doing it now? You and I had a brief discussion on this yesterday.
Well, I don't know, maybe if you had $750,000 worth of streets you wanted to do today, I mean, you're still going to have that money, but if you were to do 250 now, then you could have additional funds to do something else that you needed to do now. If there's no urgency to spend that, then I think you can go straight to 3 million. If you put it all in fund balance today, that just is money that you can't use on needs today.
Well, I'm looking at, just to do Hillcrest Drive and Sea Oats Trail, we're looking at $1.4 million, plus or minus a few pennies. We're going to need $1.4 million for sure for those two street improvements, probably more.
Councilman Neal points out that even if you could put the 1,250,000, and you'd still have $750,000 above the 3 million. So the money's there based on what we've laid out.
Well, to ask you that question, rather than theoretically, the scenario would be if we don't do it now, we want to grow to it over a year, commit $1 million or 5 years, and do $1.2 million over 5 years, we would have access to $4.2 million to appropriate now. I don't personally see that as a pressing need to appropriate $4.2 million for fiscal year. I'm open to debate, but I don't think we need to grow to our unassigned fund balance for that policy for capital.
If we wanted to, just hypothetically, if we were not really serious about our road situation, instead we want to take on a bigger bite, would it not be the right advantage to have that money to take that bigger bite with?
I don't see so, because it's necessarily already laid out. There's excess. I mean, there's two in this potential plan. There's $250,000 contributed that then could be shifted to capital reserve fund or something like that. And that being said, we're still at this moment in excess, even with all these recommendations, by $700,000. I mean, we really have to go on a spending bench, and I'm not advocating that.
I understand.
I think the only counter argument to go to what you're saying, Matt, and I'm not making this argument, but if we have that much excess right now, we could say, put aside $2 million of it and spend another $1 million on, next year's road improvements. I think that echoes what you were saying.
Well, you kind of already can, even if you don't do that, because Cliff's got 629,000 laid out, plus we got 250 that's contributed, and there's excess revenues from this year that's not even really reflected in the documentation we're looking at. We went into the year thinking we were 20% off occupancy and things like that, and that's not going to be the case. So by the time we do budgeting next year, you might be able to see our capital improvement budget be $900 million without even touching our unassigned fund balance.
Well, I'm not making the argument for doing what I just said. I agree with you. Let's go ahead and just put the designate 3 million for that right now. And then, we got, well, let me just hold off on
As a
that.
final gut check, since I'm pushing this, does any of our staff, including you, Bonnie, and Cliff, do you think that's a bad idea? You're in our finances daily, and you're looking at what we're going to be spending on. If we silo that money not today, but within the next month or so, is that going to impact us, or would you rather keep it 1.7 and try to bring it to 3?
I'm comfortable either way. When I initially started this, I went straight to 3 million in my plan, and then I changed it to the 250 to leave more money for you all to spend as you
Yeah.
see fit, but I'm comfortable, and,
Yep.
and I think Bonnie is too. If we
Yeah.
went to 3 million
Yeah.
today,
Yeah.
we'd
Because
still be able to accomplish.
there's still
these.
money on the table even if we do that. And then not only that, I look at there's $250,000 contributions, and I see that as a low hanging fruit to go to a capital reserve fund for when those years that we need to spend more than 5 cents of our taxable revenue. We've built this capital reserve fund up to $800,000.
Yeah, my first thing was, was to go to straight to the 3 million. And then, Cliff said, let's do 250 a year. So I think we would be fine if the council so chooses to go straight to the 3 million. Because like you said, it's just on paper.
Yeah.
Either, you can do it all now and then you'll have over the next 5 years, you'll have the extra 250 to spend on street projects. So it's just all what the council wants to do, but either way, we would be fine.
Bonnie, am I mistaken or am I correct? Did Peter Rasco recommend that we keep 3 million there?
Yes, sir. That was Peter and I's recommendation. When I first came here, we had something that said 50% was the target. The auditor recommended because, different years, you have building streets, bridges, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
your expenditures were kind of up and down, up and down. So trying to keep it at 50% was a hard thing to do. And she recommended that we do a number. And that was the council at the time that decided on that particular number. But Peter and I always recommended 3 million.
And that's pretty much in effect what we've been doing, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
The council at the time recommended 3 million or 1.7.
1.75.
That's what it is.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if they'd done 3, we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah. that's-
If you go to 3 million, I don't believe it's going to keep you from doing what you want to do now. So I don't think you're preventing yourself from doing capital projects that need to be done by setting a fund balance of $3 million.
Just to harp on that point, it still gives you $3 million of liquidity that you could invest today if you wanted to. Make a debt payment on the fire department or something like that. But I don't think it hinders us. We're in a pretty good shape.
You're scratching the surface on a question that I had. If we adopt this 3 million as like Matt's proposing now, set 3 million aside, do we still have enough to do everything else plus address Chief Cole's desire to go ahead and hire another officer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I'm sure we'll hear that pitch later, or maybe not today, but at some point.
Yes, sir. He's prepared to pitch it today.
I'm all for it.
That's all.
I have no problem of doing it. I just didn't want to make sure we don't run out of money somewhere along the way.
But it sounds to me like that if we overreach here by doing what Matt's proposing, then we have it within our ability to vote to undo it.
Yeah.
Yeah, how flexible is that? If,
Well,
say we go this 3, then all of a sudden we'll think, well, maybe it should have been 2.5 or 2.
I think you just have to be cautious of your credibility. If you say it's 3 million, you're committed to 3 million, then you change the policy, then were you really committed to 3 million?
I think
You
we
can do it.
Yeah,
Don't
we
get me
can
wrong.
say we're committed to 3 million, but there could be some unforeseen financial circumstances out there that would cause us to have to make a change. I don't
That's right.
think we would do it just for the sake of change. There would have to be some compelling underlying, in my opinion, economic problem.
And that's exactly what it's there for. That's exactly why. I mean, here lately, in the last several years, the fund balance has been needed for the financial storm more than the.
And the other side, and right now, the other side, excuse me, we have to look at, I think, is right now our inflation rate's low, but suppose that changes, that will have an impact. That 3 million won't buy what 3 years from now, what 3 million buys today.
That's right.
And that was one of the things I think we have to kind of keep in. It's great to say 3 million now, but 3 or 4 years from now,
3 million and 3 million.
it's not 3 million.
Just a general question though, if we have 3 million set aside like that, what happens to the interest that that money makes?
Stays in that account.
Don't ask right now.
Not much.
So currently, and I was going to bring this up to Cliff. So when I send you all the balance sheets and that sort of thing, you'll know that there's something that says the North Carolina Capital Management Trust. There's a cash and a term policy. So when the council originally established the 1.75, I took that amount from the from the cash portfolio and put in the term. And that started out at 1.75. And so the only contributions that has been made to that since that was established was interest. And I think it's at 1.89. So I don't know the exact number. I have not looked at that, but it has made interest since we have done that. So
And
the
so
count,
that gets added to that,
yes.
okay.
And so that is kept separate from the other money. So if the council wants to do that, or, and we can put the difference in that account, it's not that we can't spend it. It's just in a term account, and it usually makes more money, which right now we're making next to nothing.
That
And
could change though, obviously.
hopefully, yes. So, so that money is already put aside in a separate account. So if the council decides to go straight to the 3 million, then I can just move money from the cash account to the term account with the trust.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Yes, sir.
so if you've earned money on the 1.75, say you're up to about 1.9, round numbers. It would take a little bit less money to get you to $3 million. It would take a little
Correct.
bit less money transferred to get you to $3 million, but you could apply that interest money that you've already earned.
We
to
can,
your-
yes, sir.
Okay.
If you,
I
that's
understand.
exactly right.
Got it, thank you. We haven't got to take action on this. We could just, I think we could pretty much have a
Give them
consensus that we'd like.
direction.
We have a consensus that we'd like to increase the amount in that balance to 3 million. I think that's kind of consensus. That's what I get.
Mhm.
Okay.
And how we do it, whether we do it next week or next month, is going to be, I think that's a management decision. Let's do that decision.
Well, didn't Matt bring up, or the request that you go ahead and adjust, modify the policy? And so then we would have to just vote on that policy after we see it.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. Okay. Then if it's appropriate, we'll just move right down the list of other items, starting with the building upgrades of $190,000. Back in February of 2019, the council approved a needs assessment that Oakley Collier performed and provided, and from that, Flores Design put together drawings. And so we've got those at this point. If we are ready to take those drawings to bid for the improvements to this building, the upgrades, the code upgrades for this building, town hall, and public works. The 190 is we can bid this and then come back and you all can decide what amount to spend, how much of that we want to spend, how much of the upgrades we want to do. Do we just want to do the ADA upgrade or building code requirements? But that 190 would be kind of a placeholder. That's the number you started with, and that's the number I've put back. But until we actually go out to bid, we don't know exactly what it'll be.
Do we have an idea what we're looking at for the improvements?
Yes, sir. In this room particularly, it would be another means of ingress and egress. In town hall, it would be some ADA compliance, as well as reconfiguring the lobby and making the north and the main entrance again, and a receptionist would be set up there. There'd be some bathroom upgrades. In the police station, there would be another means of ingress and egress from the garage. What am I forgetting? And, yeah, the ramp on the north end of Town Hall would be upgraded to meet code.
Where's the other entrance for this building?
To this, in this assembly,
Over there by
One right
the
there.
SSA.
There's one right next to
What they're
it.
proposing, it would be over here. Right here on this wall.
What's the status of that one over there? That's not functioning?
no, sir.
I guess that's why the exit sign is
Why
no
that?
longer red.
So the ask here would not be that you expend the 190, it would be that we go out and get the bids and come back and see where we are.
I think we're all okay with that, are we not?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Next, the Oats Trail and Hillcrest, again, it's just whether or not you're ready to move forward with doing these projects. We could, if you so chose to put these back in the budget, then this would likely be a spring, it would be a spring of this year project. Jumping down to the other parts of there's a street section in the CIP, and what I did was this list of street improvements, as you're aware of, breaks the streets down into groups A, B, and C. This was last adopted by the council on July 9th of 2019. And so these two streets are the next two streets in line. In the CIP, you'll see that it just followed this. And you know, the next street in line is the next street that gets budgeted. But one thing you had talked about at your last meeting was getting the CIP together to, I don't know if it was to reconsider these streets to make sure, you know, we're a year and a half from the last time this was adopted, whether or not we're still on the right plan for the streets, if they're in the right order. And that was going to happen in November after you had this discussion today. So I guess, I don't know if you want to go ahead and consider these or if you want the CIP to relook at it before you make a decision. But again, without the pandemic, we probably would have already had these streets completed.
My thought is have the CIP look at it in November and come back with some changes they might recommend, just for starters. And I want to say one other thing. You're going to include the Oats Trail and the Hillcrest Drive improvements. We just talked about it a minute ago.
Well, that's up y'all.
Well, yeah, because before I would include it, I would like to see the streets extrapolated out for 5, actually, honestly, 10 years. To see, rather than just the dollar value, see what the target are. I mean, we got it through 23, 24. Whether that's CIAP or not. Because this number is the magic number. These 630, 620, 660, these are the magic numbers that we're supposed to be planning for. That's where all this interacts. And if I've got a Juniper Trail culvert that I need to tackle in 23, 24, I might not be super anxious to accelerate spending in this particular year and spend 1.4 on streets this year when I really need to be saving to do that Juniper Trail culvert.
That's exactly.
That portion of it is what I would like to see extrapolated out before I would spend 1.4 this year. 1.3. That's me.
1.4.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we couldn't have at least a 10-year CIP for streets, kind of separate, but we plug in.
But
Yeah, we plug in the 5 years here just as a. And again, I mean, this whole thing could be 10 years, but it just starts to become
Yeah,
less.
but it
Well, I
becomes
guess-
less and less valid when you
Yes.
move by past 5 years. That's been my experience. You go way out to 10, people don't really get excited about it
Right.
because there's so much can change in that time. 5 years is
you're 100% correct, but it's a framework for the discussion that as it moves forward. I mean, it can evolve and change.
Yeah,
It
this-
still is a framework.
Yeah, this plan is just that. It's not something you can adopt as the same way you would the budget.
No,
This is a plan that it changes every year.
it's sort of a roadmap, think we might want to go down.
In conditions.
Well, also by performing that exercise, it might become very apparent that $630,000 or $660,000 a year is a futile battle, and that needs to be $1 million or something like that. So that, and that would impact on, maybe we want to dump a fund into our capital reserve fund so we can tackle this. I mean, we're thinking short term in the next 12 months, but we might be able to accelerate our construction schedule over 10 years if we appropriate our excess capital back at this moment. So that's my thought.
If appropriate, we'll schedule a CIIP meeting sometime. It should probably be early November. If we're going to do any projects this year, we need to make sure we give ourselves time to get it done. You know,
Right.
Before June 30th.
So if that's the right action, we'll go ahead and schedule.
Well, so that's the part I'm a little fuzzy on, because I mean, the streets are one thing. That's kind of next couple fiscal years ain't that complicated. But when we do look at some of these things like the Jennifer Trail culvert, there's a notation on here of the town hall upgrade. I mean, those are the larger. Those are the numbers we need to be saving for. I mean, the streets are sort of irrelevant. And some of that's a bad quote, but I didn't mean it that way. But the 5 million, 1 million debt service, the fire department. I mean, these are the long-term planning goals we need to be talking about, rather than I'm going to pave this street this year. That's what I see the purpose of this document.
Yeah. If you look at the very bottom, the total, there's a number that's, you know, right now it's 2.4 or 2.2. Next year it's 2.7. I think there's a number we have to find that you're comfortable. Well, you're comfortable, and the financing will pay for that amount of debt service. And to your point, if you know, debt comes off, debt goes on, but you leave it at that number. And in year 23, 24, you know, it jumps to 3.2 million. Again, as a draft, as an example, when this is approved, it's probably not going to be, it won't be that number.
Yeah.
But it jumps up. So how do you pay for that? What's not going to get done? Because it's also priorities. You're listing out the priorities of things that need to be done first.
So to flesh that priority list out more, what would you? I mean, you'd have the input of the CIP committee,
Yes, sir.
and with culverts and things like that. I mean, that was a debate at the last meeting, is what their purview was. And some of the members of that committee were pretty confident they wanted to stay just on streets. Other members thought that the whole physical plan of the town was their purview. So that's another sort of thing that's been floating out.
I think I was the only one on that. I pretty much got shot down. Okay.
Well, I mean, probably you need to define what the purpose or the objective of the CIIP is, what their scope is. And then, you know, if you're going to expand the scope, then that's what you need to discuss with them.
To be, like, I mean, if we had a paving study done, we don't need to pick and choose streets at the committee level. My thought. Maybe with the CIP committee, we flesh this plan out, spend another 4 or 5 months working this thing so we've got it, and then the CIP committee gives citizen input on a long-range plan rather than picking streets. I mean, that to me would be more effective of citizen input.
Well, that leads back to the question about what is the CIIP committee as it is now? What is their role? I think that the last time we had a meeting, they made it pretty clear that they wanted to stay focused on streets. So,
We'll get new members.
so I think we probably ought to, and it's been suggested by somebody other than me, that we ought to just rename that committee the Streets Committee or something like that, because they're not dealing with any other capital improvement
No, I know that.
infrastructure issues except streets.
And-
That's why I was changed to CIIP instead of CIP, because they were supposed to be doing other stuff other than streets.
It was supposed
Just
to
saying
be
that's
capital
the issue.
infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Capital infrastructure.
I have to say, I think that citizen input on the street improvement priorities is something that has been historically in our community valued. There's, and also I think for planning street improvements over the last year or so, it's become obvious that the amount of money that the town is allocating for street improvements currently is too little. Because when you look at the miles of streets that we have to maintain and improve, and the rate at which we are accomplishing those two things, it doesn't add up to the amount of money we're putting towards that effort every year. So I think we have the evidence that we're not expending enough money on street improvements. It's pretty obvious.
In other words, you can't get there from here.
And yeah, and so we have that knowledge. I think the members of this council agree that that is the case. So we know we have to, if we want to get our streets in better shape, we're going to have to spend more money. I just think that's a fact. But I do believe that that where we do street improvements matters, and that having community input in our community has a value. That's just my opinion.
Well, and I tend to agree with most of that, but I'd like to point out also that the whole streets committee concept has been a very evolving process over the years. At first, it was going out there just repaving. And then they realized, and I'm going back to the days of Bill Story when he would, it was just a couple citizens riding around, analyzing and, picking and choosing. But yeah, I agree. By the time, I think Joe Anloff, the town engineer, has projected it would take us 40 years to rebuild all the streets. By the time 40 years comes up, we'll be needing to repair some of the ones that haven't even been repaired yet. So
are we, this is just staff level, are we able to up that street expenditure up to $1 million a year? And what do we give up if we do that? And that's a question you can't answer right now, but that's.
There's
What do we
a very unpopular answer to that question.
I know that I got the budget right here for this fiscal year. That's pretty clear. 3 cents. But we could feed that fund early on and let it and not quite jack it up on that rate, because we have $3 million in excess right now. And if we don't spend it all in one fiscal year, or spending 60% of it in one fiscal year, we could see the capital reserve fund to make up that $300,000 difference annually over the next 4 or 5 years as we inch up our revenues to get there. That's the kind of framework I'd like to operate on, rather than, hey, we got $3 million, let's do a birthday party.
Right.
Well, you don't want to go wild.
So I guess the questions are, get the CIP together, redefine their charge, and come up with a longer range plan to include the funding, because it's just the streets right now, but to include the funding to get a 10-year plan on back in front of you.
Yeah, and the other questions I have, like some of the larger expense items, like the $1 million for the Jennifer Trail culvert, would that typically be financed, or would we be looking to do that out of pocket? Would that be financed over a 3-year period? I mean, how does that normally work in governmental spending?
It'd be hard to finance that.
Okay.
We'd have to, because it's not.
So it is something, because I mean, we would never be able to, we would either need it in our unassigned fund balance or our capital reserve fund for that fiscal year. We would never be able to get the tax revenues up high enough to cover that kind of capital expense. So if we're having that in the future, we need to make sure that there's a buffer for it. And I would like to find out.
Well, and like you said too, Matt, if you all decide, to go straight to the 3 million, then the $250,000 that you were going to use to build up to the 3 million, you can put in the capital reserve fund over the next 3 years. And then when you get to the year of doing the bridge, you've got 750,000 designated for that, like that. I mean, so, but when we've done it in the past, we did get a grant on, I think, Tall Pine. DOT. So, I mean, we could look into that. I don't know that we can do that, but I mean, we can certainly look into it. But we did have to pay for it, no financing.
Well, the financing word that she just used, is there any way of financing through a bank or bonds or whatever the culvert?
That's the bridge doesn't fall. Go ahead.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, the
I was
bonds
just
are
curious.
something I think you could, but I'm just thinking of, I guess we could we would put something else up for the bridge. We put,
It changes my mindset a little bit if it has to be a dollar for dollar fiscal year expense versus a 4-year expense. I mean, that's a dramatic difference. But we could still finance it theoretically by knowing where it's coming up. We'll contribute $250 a year to it.
Yeah,
So
over 4.
that's the kind of thinking I want to further flesh out before we start spending on
Yeah.
that.
Well, and where did the $1 million figure come from?
Probably a place.
it's a swag. It's, yeah.
Might be 2.3.
So, and so it's just a placeholder, and you're gonna put money away for the next 4 years for a placeholder? I mean,
Well,
This is the first draft of us developing this. And once we
because it would take an
kinda
engineer,
codify it,
right, to give us a better estimate?
yeah,
Pay an engineer?
Well,
before we started contributing to it, I think I would need to have more confidence in what we're talking about.
And then you got a bigger number there in red for the building, 5 million.
Yeah, and that's
not amount funded annually.
that's a discussion,
there's another place.
a day discussion, whether or not we're gonna be looking at
Well, you see,
a new building.
yeah, and you see that number, and you see the new building. There's all kinds of torches and fireworks that come out and you talk about. But if I can find a funding plan for it, I think that and I'm not advocating for it. This is the first time I've really seen it. But if it makes sense financially for the town, then there's no argument against it in some way. But we need to lay that out in clear cut terms. And I think you're doing that. Don't get me wrong. That's the path we're on. This is the first step. So I'm really actually honestly encouraged. This is pretty. So I see this as a lot more discussion than action moment. I'll sit back.
Hey, can I go back for a second and talk about the Trinity Trail, Juniper Bridge,
Yes, sir.
which we were discussing a minute ago? What did we pay for the last one, Bonnie? Do you remember?
Wasn't the state involved with that?
The state actually helped the village, do one of their contracts.
Matter of fact, I think
I
No,
do not
no,
remember.
Juniper,
Trinity Trail and Juniper. The Tall Pine was built by the state funding, but we contracted.
state was, I know the state was involved with it, and that's about the second time they've had to redo that because they put, if I remember correctly, I wasn't even on the council at the time, but there was a different design there for that bridge. And the council killed it and went to the design that's there now, the two.
That's right.
And that's what was there before, and it sinks on each side.
That's right.
And so to me, we don't need to go back with a similar current design that's there now because it's not working.
Right.
So there's going to be a whole complete redesign of that bridge.
Could we,
Because you got to make it high enough that boats can get under it.
so could we get some information for next meeting on the years that the two
Yes.
projects took place and then the dollars that were spent, and then what was I know it wouldn't be a sure thing now, but what was the alternative that the previous council decided against?
Yes, we've started and I think it's important maybe for an attachment for all of our inventory that says when was it built, when was it maintained, how was it maintained, how much was it, and the life expectancy. And we've started that for the 3 bridges in the culvert, and we'll get that completed.
Sounds good. Thank you. So $5 million for a new building.
You know, that,
Do we want to talk about that?
That's today's estimate.
yeah, and
Where are you?
It should be a good recession.
as a part of the work in progress, just like the bridges, you know, it's an expense where I think the town's going to have to deal with at some point. Now, whether it's 5 million in that year, I don't know, but at some point, I think it's a decision we're going to have to struggle with.
That was, if I'm not mistaken, that included a complete upgrade of this whole site.
Yes, sir.
That $5 million could possibly include the police department, administrative building, and a meeting center like we have at the center, all in one huge complex. That was one of the options anyway. And there were like 3 options that we looked at. I think the number is probably what we had to look at at the time. The
And,
5 million.
and the argument that it's inevitable that has to be done is,
Time. It just because the building was built, 35 years ago doesn't mean it needs to be replaced. But I think the condition and the space, there's in town hall, there's no additional space for growth. In the building is starting to show probably signs beyond 35 years. And if it were in 5 years, we'd be looking at a 40-year-old building. So I think it's just the condition and the space and the need. But there's always a do-nothing alternative.
Are you comfortable with all this handout here has got a listing of proposed capital fund items, line items, like an employee beach renourishment fund, all these different items. Are you comfortable that these are the only ones that we really need to look at, or like canals, bulkheads, sidewalks, paths, all these different line items? Is there anything else that we would need to ideally add to this?
I tried to make it all inclusive.
It seems like it. The definition of capital reserve fund, it seems to be pretty inclusive, but
Where would stormwater management come
I think there's a stormwater component to every street improvement, but there may need to be a separate stormwater line item here.
That'd be the only thing I can think of.
So there's other buildings too that public works that might be, at least want to be penciled in.
That was included, wasn't it? The public works.
That would be included in the
They were
what
pretty.
we're going to bid with now, but
Yes.
it would not be included in this
Right, understood.
contract.
But they're getting some minor, real.
But, or am I right on moving forward with do I have your thoughts captured for the streets?
Rephrase.
Yeah.
That we're going to meet the CIP, we're going to redefine their charge or define their charge.
Right.
And come back with at least a 10-year plan with an associated expense.
Yes. Am I speaking for all of us?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what we've been.
and if we agree to rename that committee, can that be done at the council level, or does that need to come from that?
Well, I guess it come one of two ways. We could get their input and see if, from the last meeting you all had, it was pretty clear, concentrate on the streets. If that's the case, I would recommend you call it the Streets Committee.
Or Streets Improvement Committee, something like that.
Yeah. I think should have their input. That way
I think over the last
Don't worry
5
about
years or
names,
whatever,
don't
the
worry
street
about the
and the capital improvement infrastructure committee, whichever it's a tongue twister for me. I forget what all those symbols stand for sometimes. But anyway, they have been focusing on streets. And I think that's what we need to name that committee.
Yeah, I go along with that. I almost think we should go ahead and recommend also that we give them a ballpark budget. That we want to increase the budget from the current 6-something
Yes, ma'am.
to somewhere around $1 million.
Well, I'm not sure that increasing the budget or allowing, telling the CIIP committee that their budget's been increased, because what they normally do is prioritize the streets and everything, and then it's up to us
But
to fund those things.
But they, at the last meeting, I recall, they said, we have the purse strings, we mean the council. And they can't do anything without our, recommending that the money be expended.
Joe was also
So,
very hesitant to talk actual dollar costs of the streets in this meeting, so it'd be difficult for us to make a financial judgment on it.
but he's already put dollar amounts on some of the
It's
streets.
sort of twisting his arm on it, but I'm sad in there, it's just rather not.
They're the ones that we've got an engineer's estimate.
Yeah, so we've got some that are engineered estimates.
I don't know. I'd rather keep the committee out of the budgeting process. Just let them prioritize the streets, and then it's
Well, maybe if they listen to this meeting, they'll at least get the hint that we're considering going in that direction. Maybe that'll be enough information.
But if they're still working on prioritizing streets and they've bashed out A, B, and C, and the budget's your up, you can just say, okay, these 5 different budgets from that. So,
As long as you keep it to streets.
And
What we've been trying to do, though, is Hillcrest and Oats are good examples. Those are major ones. But then we also include some of the smaller ones like Dewberry, so that if we can only do Hillcrest, we have enough to go ahead and do one of these smaller streets too. But I don't know. I'm being redundant here, but I'd rather keep committees out of the budgeting.
the discussion is turning
Arena.
towards redefining the charge of the capital improvement committee to be streets committee. Is that consensus?
Streets improvement.
Yes,
Streets
it is for
improvement
me.
committee.
Streets.
Streets.
Chief
You want to put
Cole?
the word stormwater in there, you could.
That,
Because I had 1 or 2 mass meetings, I'm not really sure what we're even doing.
I would like to see a
Have it
written
spelled
chart.
out. This is
Yeah.
what your responsibility is.
Is that too much? I don't want to.
no,
We're
we
trying
can
to
do
meet
that.
in November. Is that something that you could
We can do that.
prepare? Just a very quick
Yes, sir.
mandate for that committee. And our consensus is that it's street selection.
Yeah,
Also-
which,
I don't care
which
what you call it.
includes the stormwater improvements as you do the street improvements.
Yeah, there should definitely be that. You don't want to touch the street twice.
Right, yeah.
Well, yeah, but the road standards includes the stormwater
Right.
for the
Yeah, the road,
default,
yeah.
but when you're talking about a standalone stormwater project, that falls more in my mind to our capital expenditures like culverts and town halls and things like that. Again, we're trying to limit the scope. We don't want to see scope creep by saying, well, it's stormwater, really implicit in the road design.
Stormwater unassociated with road improvements also requires a particular perspective, i.e. of an engineer or other licensed professional for that stuff. And I think engineers are the only ones on that kind of area-wide stuff. So
But I just want to be clear, we're restricting that from the street to standalone stormwater.
Yep.
Okay,
We'll do the street
Select. That's the.
yeah, that's part, yeah.
But then if they're going separate, that's a different.
But they're not even designing the stormwater, they're just saying, I'm gonna fix what we're doing.
Yeah, they're not worrying
Joe,
about,
Joe handles it from there.
they're not getting down into the weeds
Yes.
of the design. That's what they're relying on town engineers to do.
okay. Then if it's all right, we'll jump down into the additional recommended. And if I could, I'll ask the police chief. He's got, if we could jump over some of these and get to his, because he's got some in-service training he needs to be attending to. And you know, this police officer position has already been justified, and you had agreed, I believe, you had agreed to it took it out because of revenue. So I don't know if you have any questions. I mean, the chief has the presentation that he presented to you, I guess, during the last budget year. How much that you need to revisit, what questions you have about funding this officer at this time, I'll leave to you.
If you got a formal presentation.
So Chief,
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
are you asking us to fund a single position, and you would like the ability to advertise for the position at some particular upcoming calendar date?
Yeah, some of the, just before COVID, ultimately, once we did a study, we realized we needed 2 police officers. Then COVID came, and of course, rightfully so, that was yanked from the budget. So what I'm proposing for this fiscal year is to put at least one of those 2 officers back in, and please ask them respectfully that you consider to allow us to hire that officer. One thing I will tell you is that the dollar amount you see there, that includes their salary and everything that Bonnie has put in. I am confident that based on our current budget that I've already appropriated, we will not need to purchase the additional police vehicle. We'll be able to get by with what we have as long as we continue to replace our vehicles the way we have them. I also have enough in our equipment and uniform line items that I will not have to increase or request anything additional to be able to take it out of this current year to take care of that part of it. This is a presentation I had put together, but then COVID came and I never got to give it to her. So just real quick, that's our mission statement. And that changes. We try to keep it as fresh as we can. This is about a year or so ago I had to redo it. And this coincided with several of the grants that we have applied for. So this kind of correlates. And then our vision statement, which is obviously also incorporates our community policing, maintaining some of the highest ethics. As far as I'm concerned, our police department does that and continues to do that. Next. These are the call for services for 2018. The total calls were 17,330. Self-initiated calls were 15,670. The actual 911 calls that we received through Dare Central was 1,660. And then if we go to the next slide, 2019, very similar, except our 911 calls were up a little bit, but very similar to the prior or the previous year. Next. This just gives you a breakdown. This is for 2018. These are the total calls for service, and we broke that down by the months. And while you would think that, boy, the summer is some of the busiest, to be honest with you, a lot of the calls for service and that are actually in the off season. And a lot of that is because of a lot of the houses that are vacant. We have a lot of breaking in and entering and a lot more suspicious activity during off seasons. 2019 gives you another breakdown per month for our calls for service. So we're averaging anywhere from 16 to 1,500 per month. These are just some of the calls for service. Sorry, I didn't know I had it set up like that. I'll be here a week. This just gives you an idea of the calls for service that officers get on a weekly basis and sometimes a daily basis. And then 2018, this is where it was kind of a wake-up call to me, and it was a priority that I had had ever since I got the job 14 years ago, was to have 2 officers on duty all the time with supervision. It's not Mayberry, and I don't care where it is. It could be Southern Shores, but bad things can happen to police. And things have gotten worse over the last 2 or 3 years. But this is 2018, and I'll show you as we go through this how we come up with these hours. But the total hours that officers worked alone on a shift, and as you can see, it's almost 50% of the time we had one officer. And then I'm going to show you what not only the safety factor, but some of the other problems that causes. And then 2019, very similar, almost identical. 44%, the officers worked alone. Overtime issues, again, this year we had a lot of overtime posted for the summer, as we have throughout the last several years. And a lot of it we don't get anybody to sign up for, because we either don't have enough officers, or they've already worked too many hours and they just can't do it, or they're burned out. This is the current organizational chart. As you can see, we have the 3 sergeants and who they're responsible for. And if you show the next one after this proposal for the additional 2 sworn officers would bring our department up to 14. I'm asking for at least 1 out of this fiscal year, and that'll bring us up to the 13. Then what we would end up having, even though this is a little different, this is with 2 officers, even the additional officer will help significantly. It won't give us 2 officers all the time, but it'll definitely, it'll help. And what we do is you take the 2 police officers, and this is how we came up with the numbers. 24/7, 365, that's 17,520 hours. And then your Fair Labor Standard Act, that's 2,223 hours before it's overtime. Less the 450 hours, which I'll show you where we came up with that, gives you 1,771 available duty hours. And then if you divide that 17,520 by the 1,771, you would need 9.9, but you would need 10 hours just for the bare minimum patrol. That's not including supervisors. That's just the bare minimum patrol coverage. Factors that we got, how we arrived at the 452. We had the vacation, your vacation leave, sick leave, training in-house, taser, CPR. That's 22 hours. Every year, the state maintains each officer, all of us have to have a 24 hours of mandated in-service. Continued ed, radar, intox, and supervisor school, that's another 100 hours. Holiday pay or holidays is 0, because what ends up doing is the officers actually are compensated for that. And district court is 0, because the officers, we schedule them on their days off so that we don't shortchange the shifts. So they actually get overtime to go to court. Superior Court, that can tie up an officer for 12 hours. Same with grand jury. And then special assignments, mutual aid or DWI checkpoints. We all get points through the state to hold different checkpoints, and we participate in all the other police agencies down here and vice versa. We'll hold a checkpoint once, and their officers will come here. Then our officers will go, for example, to NAGSED. That's another average of 12 hours. And then we've already taken a proactive step for scheduling court on the officers' days off. But here's some of the other unexpected events that can be included in this calculation. The FMLA up to 12 weeks, or 513 hours. We had 4 officers over a 7 to 8 year period that had children. Well, their wives had the children, but they got to reap the benefit of having 12 weeks off. So we have to, even though that's not always the case, we have to include that. If someone, even though our town does not have any kind of funeral leave, if the officer's mom or dad or significant other passes, that's usually 3 or 4 days that they're unavailable. Military leave, right now we don't have anybody, but that would be a mandated 180 hours that we'd have to allow them if they were in the reserves. Workers' comp, recent occurrences last several weeks. If they're hurt on the job, over the last 10 years, we had a couple that actually lasted months. And that's another time where we're down officers. And then Superior Court, that can last a week. Grand jury appearances, and then physical arrest. And this is what you don't understand, is that 44% when there was 1 officer working, if they make an arrest, let's say a DWI, they have to go to either Manio or stop on the way to Kill Devil Hills and get a breathalyzer. Once they're done there, and that takes at least an hour, then they have to go over to see the magistrate, or they can do all of it at the jail. That's a minimum in Manio of 4 hours that officer is tied up with one arrest. And that means there's nobody patrolling Southern Shores. What we hope and normally do, that's why each year the police chiefs all sign mutual aid agreements. So if there is something hot and heavy, Kitty Hawk, or hopefully the town of Duck will back us up. And it's kind of vice versa. We assist them as well. But those are just the things that when we started running the numbers, I was really surprised that almost 50% of the time we got one officer working. Not only is it a safety issue, but it's also an issue because these officers have been doing a heck of a job out here, and they're making a lot of arrests. They're doing a lot of drug work, and that takes a lot of time. And when they make the arrest, you can see that an average of 2 to 4 hours where that officer is tied up. And sometimes we don't have that extra officers to back each other up. So I would entertain any questions if you have them.
I'd like to make a comment. I've been in town for quite a while, and I've seen where there is an obvious need to have a backup. For example, you brought up the case of an arrest and how much time he is not in Southern Shores during that time. But I also remember being in this room right here when you guys got the call for that active shooter. Fortunately, the police officer wasn't shot dead, but I can very easily see and get on board with the need to have 2 officers on duty at any one time.
What shift currently, or is there that like 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. There's only one?
We have what's called it's called a power shift, and we have a 3. Now we have a noon, a 12 to 12, and then as the summer is winding down, but also during the summer, when appropriate, we have a 3 to 3, a 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. And then the supervisors, we try to have them rotate, and they're usually the ones that work the 3 p to 3 a, so that we've at least got a supervisor till 3 in the morning type of a thing. But if and when we ever get to where I'd like to be at the 2 additional officers, 14, we'd have a supervisor covering all the time, as well as 2 officers, so that if one does get an arrest and they're in Manio, we've got a supervisor and an additional officer that are still here to take care of stuff.
I think the numbers I'm seeing is the incidents are increasing, not decreasing.
That's true.
And they're specifically classes of those.
Yes. Yeah, and yeah, the numbers are increasing, but also the calls are getting a little. I mean, myself and 2 other officers had to fight with a guy in front of the food line. I'm surprised the town council didn't get a phone call on that a week ago. So it's a different world out there right now compared to 36 years ago when I started. But like I say, the other thing to take in consideration too is that Tracy's been a blessing because, unfortunately there was no school, but she's actually back in school this week, getting acclimated and ready for next week. So we'll lose that additional officer as well.
So Chief, the last time you posted a position, how long did it take you from the time you posted the position to actually get the person through the door ready to go to work for the town?
1.5 years. But I'm going to be honest and tell you, we'll probably get some good applicants, but I'm not going to hire a warm body. I'm going to hire the right person.
Yeah, that's the onboarding's important.
That's the most important thing. We have an exceptional group of officers, and I think that's because we wait and we take our time. And I don't make the ultimate decision, obviously, but we have all of our sergeants involved, our corporal, and usually one of our officers, and we have a panel, and they all participate in that. But we want to make sure we hire the right person.
Oh, I'm all for that. That's what we did with the town manager.
That's right.
I learned last night that the one comes from town A to town B, their personnel records doesn't automatically move with them. Is that,
That's correct, but I think with all the stuff that you're starting to see across the country, that's gonna change, I hope.
that was a discussion last night.
And it should be a discussion, because I'll be perfectly honest, that personnel record, all of it, I should have access to it if I'm gonna hire somebody.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of other things. My wife was a teacher for 36 years. A lot of the bad teachers, they just move them to different schools.
Yeah.
And you're not solving a problem. And that's one of the reasons it's hard to recognize law enforcement as professionals, because we keep moving the problems around. So, yeah.
I just wanted to verify what I heard.
Yeah, that's true. I think you're going to see that change, at least in states like this. New York, they'll be tied up with the unions for probably 5 or 6 years. But I think it's important that you have access to that, because if there's a problem child, you don't want to, obviously, I know the department wants to get rid of them, but, to be fair, you just need to be upfront about that and deal with the problem, because you see what the ultimate outcome is if you don't.
Well, that was one of the points last night. Alden indicated, hiring a police officer here in the Outer Banks is a difficult challenge because you don't have a real big pool.
It is, and one of the things that's a shock to most of the candidates, we've had 2 or 3 that have come from out in the mountains, and as soon as they come here and they look at the cost of living, and they look at how much a house costs, and they go to the Harris Teeter and they see how much stuff costs, they're on their way back to the mountains because they just can't afford it. So it's difficult, but to answer your, it was a year and a half, but we hired the right people. So obviously we would like to try to fill it as quick as we can, but we want to make sure that it's filled with the right person too.
You mentioned that when an officer makes an arrest, about 4 hours of his time is tied up and everything. Recently, I got to observe from a bit of a distance, one of the police officers responds to a drug overdose. How much time does that take up of an officer's time?
We had one just the other day, which is probably the one you're referring to on your street.
Yes.
And we had additional officers on because we actually had some training that day. So that helped. But 2 of those officers were tied up one was tied up for 4 hours and the other one was tied up for probably about 5 to 6 hours. And then before he went home at 3 in the morning, he also called the hospital to get the status, and the individual was stable.
That was just one overdose
the
that
officer
y'all
brought him back twice with Narcan, and then they shocked him once, and he was breathing and his heart was beating when they threw him out of here. But that was a total of almost 9 hours for 2 officers.
Is that victim or overdose guy still alive?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't fishing for details
No,
on
that's
that.
fine.
I was just
Sure.
noticing that took up a lot of people's time. I mean, a significant
That's
amount
right.
of time.
This is just a sidebar, and I had somebody else tell me this from a deputy sheriff, that Narcan is going to become a little more challenging to acquire.
Yeah, that's a sore subject for me. Yeah,
Well,
they're almost
it was with him,
they were
too.
almost like drug dealers, to be honest with you. They said, "Here, try this Narcan," and we had all these people from out in Raleigh say, "Here, try it." And then after we started using it, and it was awesome. Don't get me wrong. Then we tried to get more, and it's like, "Well, here's how much it costs." It's like, I don't have that in my budget, so I says, "We're not carrying it." "Oh, don't do that." So it got back that I wasn't going to pay for it.
Well,
And I was contacted by 2 people that made arrangements, and they donated quite a bit of it to us. But there's been a couple of times where we've had to pay for it. And,
that was the conversation. This was a deputy sheriff sharing with me that I'm friends with.
yeah, I'm not going to name names, but don't give me something then after.
Yeah,
it's
I'm
gone,
not.
tell
I'm
me I
not.
gotta-
No, I'm going to
And-
name
and-
that
and-
one
and
either.
trust me, the price they were asking was crazy, and I didn't have the budget for it. But we're good now. We've got quite a bit.
Good.
So,
Any other questions for David? I think, thank you, Chief.
thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
I think we're kind of in consensus here. When we look at the police officer. For your benefit, Cliff, I think we're going to move ahead with that with the second police officer. I think it's a great idea.
It's a give and take stuff.
We'll recess for 5 minutes, or maybe 7 minutes.
Maybe a little longer.
Ready to resume? Meetings reconvene.
Okay, the next list for new expenditures, or if adding additional, would be the website improvements. I'll put a proposal in your packet that describes same company upgrading what we have. It's something I highly recommend that we undertake. I think we'll be pleased with the modernization. The website's 2011, I think. So I think it's time. I think the proposal speaks for itself.
Any discussion, council, any concern? Comments?
Yeah, my only question was how long has it been since we spent any money on the website? You just answered that, so.
Is that right, Sheila?
It's been 9
2011.
years. Okay.
I just have one question. And right now, if I want to go to the town website and do a search for a subject, I always get no results found.
Really?
It oftentimes, or oftentimes and always is two different things, but it's very frequently. My question is there more latitude in what you type in to get results?
Yes. Well, I think what we're proposing here will strengthen the search engine on the. I think it's just the way it's set up. You type in the word. I don't know.
Street improvements.
Street improvement. The search engine is kind of designed to go to us. Instead of picking every word every time it says street improvement, it picks up something more narrow. I can't explain it, but what this would do would be give you a more thorough list of every time the word street improvement appears.
That's perfect then.
Yeah, Sheila could probably explain it a lot better than I just did, but it's a pretty narrow scope or narrow reach that the search engine does now.
That was the part that appeals to me more than anything on that.
Okay.
You're recommending it. I think we should go ahead and follow up and do it.
Thank you.
Not from my position.
Okay, the radios, we know that's a pretty big expense that's going to come about 3 years from now. This would be the first year of contributing towards that expense. The radios, I believe, I think we have a service life that they'll end 22, 23. So again, this puts $51,000 in out of this year's funds, $51,000 for the next 2 years, or $51,000 and $50,000.
Do we need to know any that says funding a grant?
Yeah, I know that there's grant funding available for this, and I think in cooperation with the volunteer fire department, we should apply for some of that grant funds, which could pay for all of this. It's an expense either way. I think we're going to have to incur, but grant funding can pay for this total expense.
I didn't know if we started that process yet or not.
Not yet.
The grant request would have to come from the volunteer fire department,
Yes, ma'am.
but we could provide assistance if they ask us.
That's correct.
I don't think there's much question about this one. I think we have to go ahead and follow up with it.
And then last, you've already discussed the fund balance would be the beach. Do we want to contribute an amount? I'm recommending $250,000 now to establish the capital reserve fund.
Any discussion,
Oh,
council?
for the beach nourishment.
You cited the beach nourishment.
Yeah.
What did I say? I'm
Capital.
sorry. Yeah, beach nourishment fund. Yeah, in the capital reserve, a line item.
Is that going to be a separate line
Line item,
item?
yes,
So
sir.
we-
So, yeah.
So I guess I'll ask the same type of question I asked before. What are the restrictions if we set this up on spending that money?
The same, you would have to spend those funds for the purpose of beach nourishment. But pretty broad. It can be for paying for the sand, it can be paying for a study, it can be paying for sand fence, beach grass. But it would have to be spent on, and you may even call it erosion control, you know.
Yeah, I'm wondering, do we need to call it something like beach stabilization management, or is there some other
I think so.
title that might capture a more
That's it.
encompassing?
Cliff, but it's my understanding from the Carters that we need to establish, they called it a beach fund for when we go get financing from the LGC. I think that that's money, from my understanding, that we would use to pay towards the debt. Is that correct?
It would be part of that,
Uh-huh.
that, you know, it would be, that's where the money for beach nourishment would come from. But I believe we could more broaden the use, but
Right.
establish that beach nourishment, the expense will come out of this line item.
Right.
That's when the tax levies will be deposited.
Correct.
It was
Yeah.
this line item, so we're just, again.
We're just
it's a
seeding
seed
it.
funding for it.
Yeah, just as long as we can use it, we want to use it for the beach, but as long as we're not too confined about what we want to do with it on the
I think
beach.
it's illustrating a commitment of the town to the lending people that we're serious about what we're doing.
That's what the Carters
That's
suggested.
exactly right.
That's what I was thinking that it was for.
That's right, it is.
Yeah.
Now, Cliff, when you mentioned sand fencing, whatever, you know, that, or beach renourishment and the other things that you mentioned that would be in the beach fund. If I'm correct, $22,000 we get each year for, putting up sand fencing, beach grass, or whatever approach it is. Would we need to vote each time on the expenditure of that, or?
No, sir. No, sir. I believe we could leave that, continue to use that money the same way we have in the general fund. You know, that's $24,000 that we use for kind of one-off projects where we need to, if we were to do a full-scale 4-mile sand fence, beach grass, then I think we would have to use this source of revenue.
So if we have a beach fund, would we put that 22,000
I think
into
so.
that, or just keep that
I think
as?
we keep it separate.
Okay, okay.
Then
Any other questions?
those are the items, you know, from there, it's just your input on the draft of the entire plan. I mean, and you've addressed a lot of this already, but are we on the right track? Are there things here you would just, that aren't included, that need to be included? And if there's something on here that we need to take off, that's just not going to happen, then
Permit coordinator isn't necessarily an outside expense, and we've already had a salary in the current budget.
this is a new
It's
position.
an additional position, there'll be 3 occupations in the
Right. And I don't know that you typically include employees as an expense.
plan, but you're trying to give it a snapshot.
I am. I mean, I think it's a big expense. It's not a, I mean, as you know, it's not a capital expense, but it's an expense you're going to pay for forever. And I think we need to plan. I think it needs to be part of the plan. If we're talking about growth of buildings, we should be talking about growth of staff as well, in my opinion. Yeah. And you also need to see the total package. Police chief explained that the police officer is salary and benefits, but the next police officer could be salary, benefits, and vehicle, and the expense will increase.
So you're, basically what you're saying with the permitting department is that your view is that it's currently understaffed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to address that, Wes.
What's Wes's view? He's the one.
Good morning. As we talked about the other day, we do have the permit officer position open. We've been conducting interviews. Building inspector, we will be interviewing for that as well soon, and have new permit officer here, hopefully early November, and building inspector probably early December to shadow Buddy before he retires in January, February. Back prior to the departure of Dabney, it was discussed and it was determined, we all felt that it was necessary to bring in someone else and add another employee in the planning department. At this point, I think we'll just kind of see how things go after we hire the permit officer and the new building inspector and see how it goes. But the idea would be is that the permit coordinator would be primarily involved in the actual acceptance of and processing of and issuing of permits. Because the permit officer, we all wear a lot of hats, but the permit officer wears more hats. And in a lot of cases, the permit officer can be focused on a lot of other things. At the same time, we have a lot of permits coming in. So if we were to have someone who were dedicated just to the issuance, processing, review of permits, it may be able to be a little more efficient. Now, I'm not saying that we're not efficient and that we have a good turnaround in permits, because we do. But it would, I think, reduce the stress level and workload of that position. But again, I think it's something we can assess once we have these new employees in place.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Appreciate that. Explain.
When you talk about permits, you're going to be hiring somebody that's well-versed in the CAMA regulations that can issue the CAMA permits also?
The ideal candidate would have CAMA knowledge and be able to act as a local permit officer like Dabney was.
LPO,
like I
obviously,
am,
yeah.
Right. And if they don't have that qualification, then they're going to have to go through the training and rise to that level.
Dabney was great at that. Her CAMA knowledge was awesome.
She had over 20 years of CAMA experience.
And it's the same thing with the building inspector, correct, too? Because they have a lot of levels of certification, and if they don't have them all, they have to acquire them over time.
That's right. They're level 1, 2, 3, and 4 for building certifications. And building inspectors, as well as the permit officer, as well as my position, we're all involved with and review flood requirements. So, but yes, building inspector does have levels of certification. And ideally, our candidate will have their certificates.
Okay. Thank you, Wes.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
I think part of what he just illustrated is that this is a living, breathing document. We have in planning right now, we have that position in next year. But as he said, it could when we're making budget decisions, that position could easily move into 22, 23 or beyond. Because when in the spring, when we're putting together the budget, we're going to be looking at the items that are recommended in 21, 22 being included in the general fund capital budget. So all these things can move to the right or left.
So this is awesome. The top section has some costs that aren't necessarily reflected year to year in the lower section. We merge that.
Yes,
so
sir.
all in one document, and then in the totals line, it would be nice to have a breakdown that excludes beach nourishment costs.
Okay.
And then I don't know. I can do this part in my head because when I'm looking at like 21, 22, you got 2.7. You take beach nourishment out, you're down to about 1.5. You take out our normal capital improvement budget, it's 660. About $900,000 additional expenditures from our normal operating budget. So again, that's where we get this whole thing fleshed out a little bit. We could probably better allocate our unassigned fund balance because $900,000 is 9 cents in tax. So just be aware of that. If we flesh this out, we can really have these hard discussions before we're in April on how to fund the budget.
I get the point that you're making, but 900,000, I think, is not quite 9 cents. Like, Bonnie, do you know,
Probably like
it
7 cents.
used to be about 130 something thousand. What is it now?
Did you have the budget document in front of you? Say it. I think it's 156,617. It should be on the front page. Matt.
Okay,
156,617. Am I close?
That's a penny.
156.
156.
that doesn't take away from your point, though.
Let's be specific. And I was using round number too.
Yeah, I could do that a lot.
I'm just noticing too, or maybe I'm re-noticing, bulkheads and canals, sidewalks and paths are just blanks.
Yeah,
But I know we put money into canals.
true. Yeah, I can add that.
I just don't know what the number is that we use for canals now.
Now it's 20 grand every year.
Yeah.
Typically, it's sort of like just a standard transfer.
Wasn't that a participation, but also with the civic associations and the property owners? You remember that, Tom?
What's that?
The maintenance, the town puts some in and then.
Oh, you're talking specifically about the channel maintenance
Okay.
thing. That's when
Yeah,
each civic association, Martin's Point, the boat club, and the town contribute dollars to that, like $4,000 a piece or something. Bonnie knows those numbers, I think.
Well, I'm sorry, the fire chief is asking me a question. What was that I missed?
There's a small, each, the civic association, the boat club, Martin's Point, and the town each put in
$400 a year.
400 or 4,000
400 for markers.
for each entity. Yes.
Yes, sir. 400.
Okay. So it turns out to 1,600 instead of 4,000. Yes, that's the money we're talking
That's
about.
a separate issue.
That's not enough to fix too much as far as bulkheads.
So there is no money currently going into specific bulkhead maintenance, correct?
There should be
Oh,
money
operating.
in this general fund.
Yeah, there's money in the public streets, bridges. and
That's right.
canals.
There is operating.
25.
That's what I'm talking about.
But those funds are for general
Bulkhead
maintenance.
maintenance this year is 25, yes.
Yeah.
So that's something like, we're already capping some of that. for the running maintenance. But
I guess what I was getting at, beyond something's damaged, we fix it today. Are we looking at a project, a maintenance project?
Yeah.
I mean, are we looking at something that's going to cost more than the annual amount? And
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean-
know. I need to put that
or
on.
We can give it space to it, we can plug it in. Or something comes up.
Yeah,
Maybe a sidewalk.
Yeah, I got to keep digging there because the canals, we know eventually that's an expense. I don't know if bulkheads is the same way. If we spend close to $25,000 a year every year, maybe we don't ever have to do, maybe by design, we shouldn't have to do anything more than that.
So you're
But
just
maybe it
gonna,
doesn't need to be on there. I guess is what I'm getting at.
oh,
If it's not going to be a big capital expense
Right,
down the road,
okay,
if
that's
we're
what-
maintaining it like we should be,
It could be something that's just also just capital.
Well, it's also, some of the street projects, we had to do bulkhead work too, so sometimes it's included in the street project.
Yeah, more in the street, I think, than the canal, because canal owners really responsible for bulkhead.
One of our
Yeah.
most vulnerable areas is I guess it's probably Holly Trail.
may just put another footnote in that's that to go along with canals and streets, somehow to indicate. I don't know if it's necessary or not. Bulkheads would be, maybe that doesn't need to be on
now, okay, so
There's a
then that begs the question about canals. So we spent, I wasn't here, but we spent a lot of money dredging out the canals. I don't remember how much of the town's money was
It's
involved.
$3.5 to $4 million on here,
Okay,
but not all town money, but all but about 300,000.
okay, and that, all that came out of general fund,
Yeah.
because there was no capital account established for canal dredging.
And there were no assessments made to the citizens.
Okay,
We did finance, when we originally started that project, we borrowed the money and we paid on it for 1 year. And the council at that time decided, since we had the money in the unassigned fund balance, they went ahead and paid that off. So we did borrow the money initially to have that project done.
Okay, so then the question would be, at that point, I guess, is when the canal capital fund was established, correct?
Yes, ma'am. That was when they decided to they picked $20,000 for the canal and channel maintenance, which of course, I mean, it may need to be, the amount probably needs to be looked at for, if we're trying to build up to do that again in however many years, because that was a huge project.
Yeah, I guess my point would be, I don't know how hard this would be, but figuring out if we have to dredge the canals again. I don't know what the lifetime of the canal dredging project was. I don't know any of those specifics. So I guess that's something
Right.
that we need to have more information on.
Yes, ma'am.
And if that is a capital, it's clearly a capital expense, and we're not funding it at the rate it should be, then it's something we should look at.
I'd like to comment also, when we were talking about bulkheads, I would suggest leaving a line item in there, because there are, as you pointed to, there's a lot of bulkheads like on Yopon Trail, where that is actually town property over there on the water side of the street. Now, I think the town leases properties like that to a homeowner for about $1 a year or something, but I think before we make a decision not to have bulkheads as a line item in the capital reserve funds, it'd be nice to know how much bulkheads we are responsible for.
I can add that to the inventory list I was talking about earlier.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
If we got, I know there's one over there.
Some of them already been tackled.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is more of an 18-year expenditure. I don't know.
I just rebuilt that on the last one, right?
Or the CPOA.
That's a big one. Howard Trail is the biggest, I know right now, with the canal, with the bulkhead, it's starting to be lost. It's just, there's too much tree damage to the bulkhead. We're gonna probably lose it. What's our next item?
Well, we'll keep working on it. I mean, if that's all, we'll just keep fine tuning this as a plan.
So are we having budget amendments presented to us in November?
Yes, sir.
Based on the police officer, the beach fund, the radios and the website improvements and the building upgrades?
Not the building upgrades, but everything else.
So the building upgrades are going out to bid.
Right.
Does that include, are the radios included in that?
Yes, sir.
did you get enough direction from us today?
Yes, sir.
So Cliff, can I ask for direction on something, on the radios? Do you all wish for me to, show that as a transfer, like the beach fund from the general fund to the capital reserve fund and designated for that? Or do you want us to go ahead and pay that to the fire department? Like we have done that in the past for the radios over 5 years. How do you wish us to handle the money for the radios?
Well, I'd like to ask, does the fire department implement like a strategic plan, like what we're talking, not a strategic plan, let me back off that word, but do they budget and set aside for capital improvements like this each year?
I know that they gave us, and I think that we gave that to the council, a 10-year plan, capital plan.
That's what I
But I
recall.
believe that, and the chief's not here for me to verify this with, but I believe that these are in addition to that plan, if I understand it correctly. Because
Okay.
if you remember, before COVID hit, we did not have to pay any debt payment. We had talked about paying for them in full. But since we didn't do that, this is what we're suggesting, that we can pay it over 3 years and then they can have the money to go and get them instead of us having to pay the full amount on top of their contract.
To answer your question, I would like to transfer the 51,000 directly to the fire department and not set it aside in capital reserve fund for the time being until we finish this total conversation.
I just don't want to get our
Everybody's
funds,
okay
I
with
don't want to get the funds restricted.
Yeah, until it's all.
Because if a grant comes in there,
Yeah.
you're gonna get some back.
So you're proposing we just go ahead and transfer the $51,000?
In the budget amendment.
Yeah, right. Go ahead. I got it. I think Bonnie has that too.
Can we put a rider on that, that they
Yes.
seek a grant?
We need to.
Yes, I was just telling Bonnie we need to come up with some agreement to verify that those funds are going to be spent for that purpose. But the grant's an interesting part of that, because if at the end of 3 years we give them 152,000 and they get a grant,
Do we want our 152,000 back?
yes, ma'am.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, that's
So
the
we'll
problem
add
with
that to the-
transferring the funds over. Have they ever transferred funds back to the town? Does that ever exist?
Probably not. I think we could come up with a understanding that lays that out.
Okay, if we could just have it, yeah, in writing.
Well, you can also deduct it from their contracted services agreement for the next year. I mean, if you know that they achieved $150,000 grant, you just cut their contract.
That's enough, yeah.
Well,
This way.
and we could also, I mean, do the budget amendment, but I mean, I could wait and pay it later in the fiscal year too, if you wanted me to do that.
Yeah. We can make it work.
Have they gone through the process of acquiring the radios yet?
No, sir. I think they've bought a few at a time.
When is that going to happen, and then when is that invoice due?
2025. Well, we've got 50,000 this year and the next 2 budget years, so it would be,
Yeah.
I guess it would be sometime in calendar year 24.
I want to interject. I think Mayor Bennett and I went on a tour of the fire department, and I believe we got back to their control center room.
Mhm.
And we had a specific, because that's where he keeps the radios and the chargers for the radios. And I believe he said they are not required to have the new radios until, was it 2025?
That's,
I think they have 5 years to get to the point of needing the radio change out.
But he still has a need for some replacement radios
Yeah,
now.
yeah, and he had done that. That was in his budget request. He had put those in there, but
Has he acquired them, or was it in the budget?
I think he got a couple new radios.
yeah, the replacement ones. But my understanding, this 152 is to meet 2025.
It's to meet the 2020, if I'm right on the year, the 2025 requirement that you have to have such and such a radio,
You're right.
blah, blah, blah. So he wanted to have that money ready to go so that when he has to do it in 2025, he can do it.
That's right.
But in the meantime, he could also get a grant.
Exactly.
Well, I'm hoping he does apply for one.
So, okay.
Try all the avenues first.
He's pretty,
Yeah, yeah, I know he is.
anything else, Cliff?
No, beyond this, I think it's just a question of how much further do you want to go with any type of, Other
Just one question, to move off. I've seen we had 40,000 in there for land use update. Comment on that?
it's a placeholder. I mean, our land use plan's 8 years old. I don't know at what point you want to go back and revisit that. Again, does Cameron still get grant funds for that? That's a grant opportunity as well. It's what, I think we got a grant in 2012 to help with that plan, but I wanted to put that on your radar as just reminding you that you've got an 8-year-old land use plan that you may want to revisit.
That's definitely not forgotten on by me. But here's a $100 question, or actually a $40,000 question. Is this something, there's so much of that land use plan that is just cookie cutter and will be carried into the next land use plan. Is there any reason we can't do this in-house within our community rather than hiring a consultant?
The plan that we have now is kind of a hybrid between what was prepared by our consultant and what was done by the town planning board and town staff. My recommendation would be that we have the involvement of a consultant.
Did we do what?
And we have an opportunity this time because there's less restriction because of state law, and this could really be a guided document for the planning board rather than the boilerplate that you're suggesting that it is.
That's of all the many examples, I have seen planning boards take that on as a charge for developing the check in the box CAMA, but then also a more broader look at the town.
I mean, we could put in our narrative philosophy about what sidewalks are down. It's really a guiding document.
We're pretty much freed up from the camera requirements on this, aren't we?
And freed up from what part of CAMA requirement?
We have to have land use plan.
Yeah, well, you have to have a comprehensive plan, and the land use. If you have a comprehensive plan, your land use plan can act as your comprehensive plan. But
Are municipalities still required by CAMA to do it?
if we don't have our own CAMA land use plan, then
Then
it
we
falls under the counties.
Right. So I can see both sides of the argument, but I think I would tend to lean on we might as well do our own because we're unique enough away from, the county as a whole.
Yes, sir. I would recommend that we continue to have our own individual land use plan.
I tell you, as far as it goes, as far as hiring consultants to do this kind of stuff, I'm still a little gun shy because of what happened with the code rewrite. That thing has been going on for so many years. That's ridiculous. But I think it's a new day, a new council, it's a new town manager that if we hired a consultant to do a land use plan, that we just stay on target, keep it moving, and not let this code rewrite fiasco type thing happen again.
Is it a consensus that we consider go ahead and doing a land use plan in-house, or as Wes suggested, we bring a consultant in to help us with it?
Next fiscal year, the consultant and all the census data.
Yeah.
For next year?
Yes, sir.
Yes, and that's what you would budget for in your proposed budget.
Okay.
And that would also give us time to seek the grant.
Right.
He's got it over in 2021, 22, excuse me.
Anything else, Cliff?
No, that's the direction we can take for the next kind of the financial plan and then the land use plan.
I don't know, maybe I just didn't hear Councilman Neal when he said the list of budget amendments. Did it include the budget amendments for street improvements for this fiscal year?
No, ma'am.
So you want to wait until CIP meets?
That's right.
So that would not come to us until December.
At the earliest, yes, ma'am.
Got it.
Now, I asked you earlier if you got everything you needed from us. You indicated yes.
Well, yeah, she was clarifying, I think, for her sake, but
No, that was a lead into my next question. Do you have any frustrations with us right now?
no way. No, sir.
Good answer. Okay.
I don't know what he expected you to say.
Yeah, really.
Any further business, council? You want to discuss anything else?
Let him go to work.
If not, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
I would just like to say one more thing.
Oh, okay. I'm
Sorry.
sorry. We do have a place on there for council comments.
I know that as a family, as a community, as a town, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way out to the country, we're all extremely tired of living with this pandemic because it's really, it's always there. And but I really just would like to say that I hope that that everyone believes that we are all in this together and that everyone can do their part to try to limit the spread of the virus. And even though it's been with us a long time, there have been some really horrible consequences. And I think the longer you live with something, the less you think about the consequences side. So I just want to remind everyone to please do your part to limit the spread of the virus. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Mhm.
Well said. Wear your mask and your gloves and stay 6 feet apart. Anything else?
No, I don't have.
Have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.